So if we imagine that bush road, that unsealed road, is the Aboriginal road, it's the broad road, and we'll come on to why it's broad in a minute, but we can see the rules are different. Now let's just, once again, without moralising, just this story, analogy, look at how people on the two different roads might see each other. How would you imagine that someone that is driving down the Stuart Highway, going fast, not slowing down, no need to slow down, over the creeks, sticking to the left-hand side of the road the whole time, they look across and see someone driving on the dirt road. Ooh, they're illogical. What are they doing? They're speeding up and slowing down, and then for no real reason. They're looking around at the countryside all the time. They're looking at, they're driving from side to side on the road. And of course, on your nice bitumen road, you can't see that people are driving wherever is possible, because sometimes one side is washed out or the corrugations are bad. And I have to tell you a little incident in my own. I've done so much bush driving. Going down the Tanami Highway once, I was following the least bad part of the corrugations from my point of view, and I was driving on the right-hand side of the road, and I'm coming around this big sweeping bend, and on the left-hand side is a big tanker, big road train, 3 big trolleys on the back. And he was on the other side of the road, his right side of the road. So without a blink, we just drove past each other, not the slightest problem. Now, imagine doing that on the Stuart Highway or the Pacific Highway. You just couldn't do it, could you? So the point is that someone from the Stuart Highway, the bitumen road, looks at someone on the broad road and says, whoa, why are they doing that? That's illogical. They're slow. Why are they slowing down? Why are they not doing things in a systematic way? So let's reverse that perspective. And someone from the bush road is looking at someone driving down the bitumen road, and they can't see it's bitumen, and say, whoa, that person's driving really fast. They're going straight over that creek. They haven't even slowed down for the creek. It might be a washout. And in fact, I believe last year there was a very sad accident. People drove down the old Pacific Highway somewhere near Newcastle, and the bridge had got washed out, and they went over it and they were killed. Them and 2 or 3 members of their family. So we can see perspectives are really important. When people seem to be behaving illogically, an alarm bell should go off, because most human beings aren't illogical. They work to social frameworks and laws. If we see someone as illogical, 2 alarm bells should ring. Firstly, we should ask ourselves, are they operating in a different framework? And secondly, we should ask, are they looking at us as illogical? If they do, are they going to follow our suggestions? Because when we're in the dominant culture, the Stuart Highway, or living on the East Coast, or living, where there aren't dirt roads, most people have very little idea of how to drive on a dirt road. So that's number 1, perspectives. Now I'd like to take you a little bit further in this story. And I'd like to ask you, or would like to say to you, that there is a bigger interface than just the work-family interface that we have, that we, all of us, experience, how painful that can be at times in our lives. The bigger, much bigger interface is between, and I'll put it in red, is between mainstream culture and indigenous cultures. So we have mainstream and indigenous cultures. Now, I'm not claiming to be an expert on indigenous cultures, but what I am saying is that I have sat at this interface, this side of the interface of course, sat at this interface for many, many years in my working and personal life. So I can talk about that interface. Just like we can experience this interface, we experience this interface when we work with Indigenous people. And Indigenous people experience this interface too. But the key thing to remember is that in mainstream culture, it's very hard for us to understand the pressures that are pushing in on everyone here for mainstream to operate. So the most obvious of this is when we go to a place, we will speak English, not the local language. Now that's fine. I'm not moralising about that or saying anything about that other than let's just consider these people here, they've already shifted and got pushed ground because they're not even using their same language. It would almost be for us if someone came to our capital, Canberra, and started talking in a different language and we had to speak that language to them in our parliament. How would we feel about that? So regardless of the morals of it, looking at the interface, let's take an example, a typical example. Now we've talked about the tension arising from being in a no-win situation when your boss has asked you to work, you would like to, but you've got to spend time with your family. If you spend time with your family, you lose, don't you? Because you've gone too far towards your family, and what's your boss going to say? Now, if you take the other decision, it's like a rat in a maze, isn't it? You'll get shocked either way. You go this way, what's your wife or husband going to say to you? What are your kids going to say to you? Now, let's suppose that you've got a case where you've got an Aboriginal person working with you. You're in a working environment. And you're working with an Aboriginal person. So let's suppose it's here. You're working with this Aboriginal person on the interface. Now I'm going to move away from, once again, I'll keep stressing, moving away from the shoulds and the morals, moving away from even, people can use culture as an excuse just to get personal benefit. Let's strip all that away and look at a case where there is genuine conflict. Okay, genuine conflict. So we stripped away someone just trying to make an excuse to get personal benefit. We stripped away the morals. Now, in this example, let us suppose, I'm just using an example, but suppose this Aboriginal person comes to you and they're in charge of a lot of money. And so are you. You might be running a community store or in charge of some program. And they've just heard that there's been a death in their family and they are the number one person responsible for that funeral. And they've got to go immediately because there'll be severe social disruption. And once again, I stress, I'm just using this as an example because you can always find ways around, things. So what happens then? What do they do if they need to, say, fill up with a 200 litre drum of fuel in the back of a Toyota to go a long distance out bush? What are they going to do? They've got no money. It's the day before payday. So both you and that person are under a lot of stress because there aren't any rules to sort it out, are they? Because if you have you're responsible for money, then you've got to obey the laws in this area here. But if you're responsible for your family, you've got to obey family laws. And in a sense, your family's always, that pressure is always going to be greater for nearly everyone, is going to be greater. So what are you going to do? Suppose you're this Aboriginal person and you say, well, I can't go to that funeral, I have to wait. I'll wait till tomorrow. And there's huge trouble where you could have gone. So you've moved in this direction here. What are your relatives going to say to you later? Just like here, for us who sit here, what are our kids going to say to us later? We do it again, again, again. What are they going to say as they grow up to us? Hey mum, hey dad, you were never there for us when we needed you. What are people going to say to this Indigenous person? They, you know, I'm serious, they're not trying it on. This is a real issue. These people here are going to say, you weren't there for us when we needed you. You expect us to help you now? On the other hand, if this Indigenous person goes this way, what's going to happen here? What are people from here going to say? What's the government going to say? What's the, you know, the staff of the organisation going to say? So, not talking about morals, but just talking about that situation that arises frequently for Indigenous people and for the mainstream people that work with them. So these issues, they take a lot of dealing with. And that is why Little Fish is involved in communication. Because where you have choppy seas, where you have noise, where you don't have clear rules, communication becomes absolutely vital, absolutely major. And one of the main reasons that we haven't progressed, why Aboriginal money that's spent in Aboriginal areas is not being used efficiently enough, is because we don't communicate and take into account this area here and develop strategies and ways for looking at it. Because it's not a question of morality, that's a totally separate issue, and I'll leave that to other people to debate. But if we look, it's two things. It's about travelling down, as it were, different roads. It's about perspectives. Do we acknowledge other people have a perspective? Because it's not about that acknowledgement, it's about the reality of the situation and getting to the reality. So this is a very powerful and useful tool. And when you're talking to people that have very little experience, perhaps they don't even speak another language. Perhaps very unlikely they speak an Indigenous language. So if they have very little experience, then it helps them to, you explain their own situation and then you generalise to this situation. So I'd like to sum up. I'd like to say that what we've talked about, we call the two roads story, the two roads idea. That what we're focusing in on is good communication across cultures, engaging. And we're talking about the interface. We're talking about experience, not morals and not should. And we're talking about building from people's experience and explaining to people from their experience and analysing the problem. So I hope you've enjoyed this presentation of the two roads.